into this really late stuff.
I saw that.
Because it's late stuff by, what do you mean when you say late stuff?
Like very, very, this is much more recent. We're talking 500 years ago or so. Like, beginning, there's a huge change in the southeast. The people that were living here on the coast, this sort of Deptford, and there's a couple other ceramic sequences I'm not really seeing bits of those, but they're
Could
probably,
they be in our next box?
they might be. Well, no, this all looks like European materials.
Okay.
There might be some.
I know, I'm having
This
trouble
piece
with
might be Wilmington, which is sort of, it's clay tempered or grog tempered, but it's cord marked. It's a bit eroded, but anyway. It can be a little bit later, but these things, around about 1100 AD here, it's a little bit earlier, farther west, but Mississippian culture arrives or develops and sort of spreads across the entire southeast. And there's three major centers of Mississippian culture. One's at Moundville in western Illinois, right at St. Louis.
St. Louis was the big.
Yeah, Cahokia was the main sort of
100,000
town.
people lived there.
Yeah, yeah. Then, or not Moundville. That's Cahokia. Yeah, Moundville in northern Alabama, and then Etowah in northwestern Georgia. And those are the three centers. But you have very similar pottery, at least from Etowah to the east. And you begin to get these real elaborate designs that are carved into the wooden paddles and stamped on the pottery. And wow.
Were they making it that elaborate in the West?
No,
Because
the
their
paddles-
graph, the stuff on the rocks is really simple.
Yeah, yeah. As you go west, this real elaborate paddle stamp pottery seems to be mostly from sort of Moundville east and the southeast.
Interesting.
And even to the, and with this pottery comes corn. Their first time that they're growing corn, and they're relying on agriculture much, much more than they had been in the past. So there's also there's social structure that begins to develop. Mississippian society was very hierarchical. There's somebody at the top, and there's levels of people underneath them, and it spreads out geographically from these centers. And we're way, way out on the edge here, okay? So the closest mounds, there are some mounds on the Santee that probably aren't that far away, and there was one at Savannah. These are the guys that are building big earthen mounds.
Some of the ones up north apparently had like 30,000 people.
No, Dan, there's St. Louis.
Yeah,
Same-
Cahokia, yeah, there were
Is that right?
30 to 40,000
Is that
people
right?
living there within a couple
Jeez.
square miles
That's a lot of corn.
for a short period of time, yeah, and they probably overextended themselves. But this sort of tradition carries on right up into like the Seawee would be making pottery very similar to this.
Yeah.
There's a motif that's real common in the southeast called a Philpott cross, and these are elements of that are all tied into this design. But the interiors of it are really
I was
highly
gonna say,
polished.
how are they
It's
polished, yeah.
burnished if you feel it. I mean, it's just highly polished.
Do they, is it black, what's the word I'm looking for? Are they treating it with fire to
Well, they
kiln
heat
dry
it.
it? Yeah.
Yeah, they put it in a fire, but this was done to get that finish. You let the clay dry to its leather hard, and then you take something hard and you polish it, and before you fire it, and then when you fire it, it will come out with this finish on it. So
And obviously the neck is big enough to get your hand in.
yeah, but they have but this is then called a line block stamp, and this is common. Like the Yamasee were making this stamp, and the people around. It's real common in that ceramic tradition of the Mission Associated Indians, Florida, Georgia, and the Yamasee. But the people around here they adopted that design. The line block stamps appear in the pottery type. We call it Ashley series, and it was named after the Ashley River by Stan South. He found it at Charlestown Landing when he was digging there for the original settlement. There's this pottery that probably the Kiowa Indians, all the folks living around Charleston Harbor were making that. This one is just elaborate. I've not quite seen anything quite like that pattern before. But this is another piece that's smeared over, and then this is the rim of the pot was there. can see
Oh,
it's
yeah.
probably a recurved, it's a jar that's flares up like this, and there's little notches that are on the rim. It's pretty common
Oh, yeah, yeah,
at
yeah.
that time period.
And
Yeah.
again, what time period would that be?
This is, we're talking, this is probably 1550 up to about 1700. So we're beginning to get in the time when,
You know,
yeah.
we're beginning to get.
Yeah, you're,
Yeah, there we
you're
go.
very,
Okay.
very close. Yeah, with these pieces.
We've come in the door.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's probably some other
Unfortunately, the
pieces
front
of this.
door.
They're pretty small. These are rated pieces. But these pieces, they're smoothed over. That's Mississippian or Ashley. We kind of think of, you know, those are the Indians that were here when the English came, and they live here for another 50, 60, 70 years. I mean, there's still Native Americans here,
Yeah.
right, that have just wandered off. But those groups broke down pretty quickly or were consumed. And there's the Amnesty War in 1715, which resulted in the demise of a whole lot of
Yeah.
groups. Read
Tell
the-
us about that.
the Amnesty War?
Yeah.
Well, the Amnesty come, and they are, Carolina, the English arrive in Carolina, and there's competition with Florida. Anyway, they arrive in Carolina, and really the biggest thing,
They
you
were all
know,
named George, Peter.
yeah, what they want to, early on, the big thing that they're doing are trading with the natives, the Indians, right? That's driving the economy of the colony for the first 30 years or more. The Amnesty have been, they arrived on the coast of Georgia in about 1650. They went around with the Spanish for a while. Some of them were in Florida, some are on the coast of Georgia. They get settled in a couple places, but they're actually fleeing from Indians who are raiding the interior Indians and carrying them off to be sold as slaves, primarily in Virginia. So this Indian slave trade is the big thing that's driving all this. So the Amnesty, they leave the interior where they're being raided by these guys that have been sold guns by the Virginia traders, and they move out to the coast to see the Spanish. Maybe they'll take care of us. Well, they get raided out there.
Right.
It doesn't really help them too much. So the English arrive, and plus the Spanish, their idea of settlement is to bring Christianity to the locals. You know, so the missions established by the friars and priests, you know, are to make Christians out of the Indians, and that way they can grow the colony. You know, the English are most interested in gaining wealth and land and trading with the Indians. They don't really care about that. The Amnesty were not really interested in Christianity, and they just never buy into it. So they came in conflict with the Spanish pretty quickly. As soon as the English arrived, it's like, oh, there's another opportunity. Let's go see what these guys can do for us. So they move up here. And then a bunch of the other coastal Georgia Indians come up with them. And they all become what we call in South Carolina the Yamasee, or the Yamasee Confederacy. And they become the principal trading partners and military allies of Carolina. And so from about 1680 or 85 or 90 until 1715, they roam across the entire Southeast carrying off people and bringing them to Carolina to be sold as slaves. Like, they depopulate Florida. When the Carolina traders give them guns, the Spanish do not give their Indian allies guns, and so the Yamasee decimate the Southeast. And really, because of them, they're forcing all of these people to the West to suddenly agglomerate and become the people, the things that we know as tribes. Those things didn't exist much before, and especially before the Amnesty War. So in 1715, eventually the Amnesty ran out of people to bring back, really. And they were trading deer skins as well, deer skins and people. And deer skins, it became harder to get deer, I think, and they went into debt, and so a lot of things happened. And they had a big falling out, so they killed a bunch of Indian traders to sort of make a point about, we think we're being cheated here, or we need, you know. And the Carolinians took really poorly to that, and so they decided to drive them out. So that's the Amnesty War. By 1717, they are gone. They have left here, and they went south and dispersed. And after that, Carolina will only trade with a tribe, a nation. And they define that as the way. Because before, they were trading with anyone, just any person that they could interact with. So they sort of force all these people out there to now define themselves as a tribe. or a nation. So the lower creeks, the creeks form, all these people begin to form to the west
So
and the
they can
south.
trade.
So they can trade with Carolina, yeah.
The,
And,
is Yemassee
I never knew any of them.
south of here, is that the area where they were?
Yeah, they settled mostly around Port Royal. That was
okay.
what the area they liked, and they've returned to there several times, even after the war. Some of them came back to live there at different times, and they lived as far north as about the Ashipu River. They came up that far when they first in the 1680s, and then Carolina government convinced them to move south because Beaufort. Well, there was another settlement down near Beaufort, Stewartstown, that the Spanish destroyed. There were a bunch of Scots that they told them they could go down there and settle, and then they just kind of abandoned them, and the Spanish came and, well, the Scots raided St. Augustine, and so the Spanish raided them, and they weren't as well adept at defending themselves as the Spanish were, so
Really?
they were destroyed. Yeah, that settlement was wiped out, and so then Beaufort comes around, and so they want to do more, so they sort of convinced the Amnesty to all settle down there, and they create sort of 10 towns that are a big buffer around where Beaufort is, and so and they gave them all that land. That was another thing, that people began moving into lands that they gave them by 1711, 1712, so they're losing space, and they're just upset with the whole thing. But anyway, so that's a little bit of history. So that, this kind of pottery it's very, very similar to the Altamaha pottery that the Yamasee make, but we would call it Ashley here, this design. And it's what the local Indians were making at the time that the English come, and probably up until 1700 or maybe even later. We're not really sure. It begins to break down.